etc. So as a little preface, this is not to make any statement that women don't belong in programming, or that women don't know how to program, or that they're not good programmers, etc., etc. No. As a matter of fact, there are two particular programmers who are female that I can think of right off the top of my head. I don't know that many, but two right off the top of my head who I would consider to be very good programmers that I've had the privilege of working next to. In fact, just strictly by comparison to all the male programmers that I know, I would say that they probably surpass a decent portion, if not a majority portion, of the male programmers that I've worked with. So, my whole message here is that programming doesn't care about your gender. It cares about how well you execute on the task at hand. And women are quite capable of doing this. There's no issue there. If you are a female who's interested in programming, we could use you. Like, we really need good programmers to be in this field because we've lost our way. So this isn't about females, bad, think anything like that. However, this is about the lens by which people who are in this industry view the world, view their colleagues, and view the industry itself. So we're going to go through it. And what I'll do here, just one second, see if I can pull this up correctly. Yeah, that's fine. And then we'll go like this. So this paper was created by this woman. Her name is Felian Hermens. I'm not sure how to pronounce that accurately, so I do apologize for the lack of proper pronunciation. She's from Amsterdam. She's a researcher and a programmer. She, as you're about to find out, she has a history in programming, computer science, programming language, a degree, etc. So she's no stranger to the industry. It's not like she's someone who's coming in without any sense of what the industry is like. She participates in it. We're about to find that out. But you can see already, who she is. You get a sense of it and her background, creating a programming language for everyone, so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, with that in light, I'm going to read this paper. Not all of it. I will kind of try and stick to the points that I have, which summarize the paragraphs so that we don't have to read it in its entirety. But we will read some of it word verbatim because it does it proper justice. I will do my best to reserve any kind of opinion that I have on it. What I would like to do is leave it as an exercise to the viewer while I go through it to determine what's being said here, and then I can do my closing opinions afterwards. So, first of all, when you think of scientific study, I had to go look this up. When you think of scientific study, you think of people with lab coats doing measurements and, with the beakers and all of that in some lab, or somebody, punching in a bunch of numbers on a calculator and coming up with, formulas and proofs for things like this. But not all scientific papers are like that. You can have a scientific paper that's considered an essay. So an essay would be kind of like a perspective on a topic based on information that you've gathered that references other scientific papers. So the reason why a paper like this can exist and be called scientific is because there is a place for these kinds of papers in the scientific field where you can write an essay. And that's what this is considered. It's considered a scientific essay. So not necessarily a scientific study. Kind of a little bit iffy if you would consider it a scientific paper, but strictly by the allowed terms of some of the definitions of what a scientific paper could be, this would fall under it, and so here we are. Now, in this paper, Felian, I'm not going to be able to pronounce the name properly. She begins by talking about the design of programming languages. What does it mean? And why would we care about the diversity of the people who are in the programming language community? And so she starts by saying that it might behoove us to consider a feminist lens for how we tackle programming and in specific programming languages, because there are opportunities to be had by considering these things. Let me just get rid of, I'm not sure if I can even, it's fine. There we go. Okay. So she begins by talking about her history. For as long as I can remember, I have been in love with programming. As a preteen, I excitedly taught myself programming with basic books from the local library, and as a late teenager, I joined my high school's computer club. And my high school capstone project was a rudimentary machine learning algorithm. And then she goes on to describe how she created a small programming language for the SAT solving, how she took a PhD in programming languages, and how she participated throughout her career with other programmers and in the programming sphere. She says towards the end here, for all intents and purposes, I am a very normal programming languages person with one notable exception. I am female. For the longest part of my career, I did not want to think about this fact. It was painful to even see myself as different from my peers. I just wanted to blend in, do the things that I liked doing, and not cause a stir. I tried to control surface aspects of myself in order to fit in. No earrings, no dresses, no nail polish, and certainly no knitting. Even though knitting, like programming, uses formal languages and requires mathematical thinking and extreme levels of care and preciseness, and would, in theory, be a fitting hobby. I thought things would be easiest if I would just be one of the boys. So as she continues on, she describes how she went from software engineering to computer science education as she moved away from the programming language community. And one of the reasons why she did that is because of this inability to fit in. From her perspective, she didn't feel like she fit into the programming language community, so she kind of shifted around. She wanted to teach. Instead, she felt it a bit more receptive. And then she started to see that the way that the field is being shaped in regards to people who show interest and who enter the field is, in her mind, lacking. So then she asks these questions, italicized here. How come I, lover of grammars and parsers, creator of a programming language, do not feel at home in the programming language community? What are the dynamics that cause this feeling, and who else might feel left out? I found answers in a place I would have never thought to look. Feminism. Why feminism? I understand thinking of feminism is confusing for programming languages people. Trust me, it did not come naturally to me either. I thought feminism was about gender. How can gender of all things play a role in programming language design? How indeed? Yes, programming languages are mostly made by men, but how can that matter? Feminism, as I understood it, concerned itself with inequality. It encouraged people to start women in tech groups and such, things I did not think I needed. After all, I had not needed anyone's permission or encouragement to study computer science. Feminism was something that others needed, not me. Embracing that would be embracing my gender, and I wanted to rid myself of it. And because of my interests and studies, most of my friends were male, so in my social circle and in my workplace, feminism was not looked upon with great admiration or praise, making it even more unlikely that I would think that it could be of any value to me. When I sometimes cited feminist work that I found interesting, I was not met with enthusiasm. So I stopped bringing feminism up in those circles. It wasn't until I met more women in science outside of computer science and in my personal life, like the knitting group she was in, that I found spaces to learn about feminism and how it can help us understand the world, including the programming language world. So then she goes on to describe why do we value hard, and the idea from her perspective behind computer science is the hardness of the work is more valuable than the qualitative. So it's the quantitative part of programming that is the most valued part, as opposed to the qualitative part. So she wanted to build a programming language that could be built using Arabic, for example. She goes into how Arabic is written in a completely different way. And there are other languages that also use a different numerical system for at least some numbers. And so she thought, why is it that English is the primary way that we use programming languages? Why not something else? And when she began to go down that road, people started to ask her, okay, but why is this hard? Right? So I'm just repeating to you what she experienced when she started going down this road. And so she created this programming language called Hedi, or Hedi, I think. I'm not sure. And she feels really proud about it, right? Of course she does. And then she describes that hard work is something like mathematical proofs or, boundaries of programming design, things like that. And because people didn't see her programming language in terms of allowing people to use different languages, like different oral languages or written languages for programming, because they didn't see it as hard, she began to ask questions about why that is. So then she goes on to describe how feminism can help question values and priorities of programming languages. So as an example, and to some degree, I do have to agree with this point. I did say I would reserve judgment, but this isn't judgment, this is an agreement. There is a focus on programming languages that are easy to read for the machine rather than easy for people. Now, to a degree, I actually do agree with this. There is a disconnect. You have to agree that there's a disconnect between a human being being able to read machine code versus the machine being able to read machine code. So I'm in agreement there. I will let go of anything else I want to say about it. I'll just put that there, right? I'm trying to be objective and fair and start off on a positive foot about this. So I will hold back on anything else. If you guys want to chat about it, yeah, you can go ahead. Just make sure you keep it terms of service friendly and don't be, unnecessarily mean or whatever. But that's what it is. Okay. And so she continues on that to continue to bring up the point that qualitative work in programming is less respected than quantitative work. Okay. So she sees it as an opening for more understanding on how we can build better programming languages. Then this header, I'm not sure what this header is supposed to be. Feminism can to better us understand science. Sure. Okay. So she reads this paper called Glaciers, Gender, and Science. It describes the concept of women in science, how they have been, let's say, become a minority, how they've been pushed aside, and it colored her perspective on computer science and women in it. In this paper, Carrie et al. Wrote, most research and hence discourse and discussions stems from information with mainly characteristics and within masculine discourses. Valuing hard technical work over work done for the sake of helping others is a masculine discourse. That's how she describes the programming language community. The impact of men on programming language research goes beyond that described. Since programming languages are not discovered out in the not discovered out in the wild, but are made by and for people. Okay. So then she goes on to describe what is feminism. A worldview that values women and that confronts systemic injustices based on gender. According to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, feminism is an intellectual commitment and a movement that seeks an end to gender-based oppression. Oppression and discrimination can be explicit, the right to vote or have a bank account, or implicit, preferring things that are deemed hard, as described above. Given what we just went over about how something that is hard is mostly male-driven, right? It's mostly the male discourse that powers whether programming something has a value because it's hard to program something. I'm not going to say it, but at least not right this second because we want to get through the paper, but I just want to read this again so that you guys can pick up on what's being dropped here. Oppression and discrimination can be explicit, the right to vote or have a bank account, or implicit, preferring things that are deemed hard as described above. So if you are a male and you value things that are difficult to do in programming, what are you participating in? In an academic context, feminism helps us understand and address discrimination that is harder to see and identify, implicit and systemic discrimination. So she talks about the feminist social movements, feminist equality, workplace harassment, suffrage, the suffragettes, or the suffragette movement because of birth control, because of gender pay gaps, etc., etc. She's just describing currently what it is, right? A central principle in feminism, particularly in feminist philosophy and feminist science and technology studies, is that this is key. Knowledge is shaped by the context in which it is made, by the people who are creating knowledge. And that knowledge shapes our world physically and ideologically. Knowledge has power. Feminist standpoint theory argues that knowledge is socially constructed and that people from marginalized social standpoints, like women, have lived experiences that provide perspectives in the construction of knowledge that are valuable, despite often being undervalued. She then goes on to describe the feminist standpoint theory, which is just diversity and intersectionality, but just applied through the feminist lens, where everybody has some kind of divisible intersection by which they can have a lived experience, and so it colors your stamp. In the context of programming language, the programming languages that have been created and the ways we study programming languages reflect the values of the creators and their social context. A programming language, as all technology, bears the imprimatur of social context. So she's making a case here for the concept that because a human being who can be divvied up into particular types of components has a lived experience that provides a context, and all contexts are socially constructed based on that intersectional set of divvying up your components, therefore, by extension, all programming languages come with this knowledge is power, socially constructed content. In aggregate, programming language knowledge creation reflects implicit and explicit values of their creators who have historically belonged to a relatively homogeneous community. That narrow window of acceptable knowledge creation is limiting programming language research and design. Feminism is about more than gender. Feminism starts from a place of ending gender-based oppression, but generalizes this to think about systems of values and hope those shapes and are shaped by the discourse of dominant groups in many places and in programming language men. That was a very weird paragraph, but I read it verbatim. It is what it is. In this paper, we are drawing from inclusive and expansive view of feminism and feminist theory, including intersectionality and third world feminism. From this lens, feminism takes into account how discrimination across many different social and cultural identities is interconnected. To address and reduce discrimination, we need to understand how gender, race, class, sexuality, disability, nationality, etc. intersect. Lou Hammer famously said, a famous American civil rights activist, nobody's free until everyone's free. Feminism is for everyone. So what she describes here in this portion is the concept that feminism will open up the door for men also to benefit from enhanced programming language design. Because as she's about to go into, when you look at programming language design from a feminist lens, it opens the door for particular enhancements that'll make it better, more enjoyable for men as well. So therefore, everybody wins by looking at things through this lens, not least of which being that you end the discriminatory norms, okay, and systemic injustices. So she goes on to describe the structure, yada, yada, the thesis statement. We can build a more inclusive culture inside of programming language design. And then she talks about exclusion. Knowledge is not absolute and neutral. Knowing cannot and should not be separated from context, from the knower, who is doing the knowing. This leads us to question what type of knowledge and knowers exist in programming languages and how that shapes the resulting languages. This might be a hard to grasp statement for people with a computer science background because 1 + 1 = 2, whatever you think about it, right? However, so much knowledge is contextualized without people realizing it, even in programming languages. For example, Western programming language designers might disregard cultural aspects of non-Western languages, like non-English numerals. Let's consider a definition in simple grammar. Digits are 0 through 9. I had never realized before I started to work in localized programming language design that this does not include all people's experiences. In Arabic, digits are not 0 through 9, but this symbol to this symbol. These numerals are not included in most programming languages, creating an exclusive, like an exclusion of these people from the field. We do not, therefore, take into account the knowledge they have built, the life they have lived, the context that they live in. Likewise, programming language designers often fail to take visually impaired programmers into account. For example, system.cout is not a great user interface, UI, if you're consuming code via screen reader, which might read this as system.cout greater than, or even system pause C out greater than, since a full stop is not read in regular text. At the moment, accessible programming languages that ensure usability by people with disability, like the language Quorum, are uncommon. Now, I will say again, on a positive note, I do have to agree with her here. We do not have good accessibility features for programming languages. I actually do agree here. She's got a good point. If you think about the programming languages that are available to us, they do tend to lack in terms of the ability for someone who needs to use a screen reader to be able to properly, parse out and understand. It can be a challenge. Is it impossible? I'm not sure it's impossible, but it definitely is challenging. I would have to agree with this. Error messages are another way. Error messages are another programming language design feature shaped by people's standpoint, by their lived experiences and values. For many programming language designers, error messages are an afterthought. Other aspects of design will likely overpower the careful crafting of error messages, such as an optimized compiler or an elegant syntax. Many language designers explicitly or implicitly take the stance that users will just have to deal with error messages when they occur. Error messages in many languages explicitly do not include the user in their phrasing, saying things like missing bracket or unknown variable, which leaves the user out of the equation. I just want to read that one more time. I just want you guys, I'm dead serious here. I want you guys to pick up on what's being said here. Please pay attention. Error messages in many languages explicitly do not include the user in their phrasing, saying things like missing bracket or unknown variable, which leaves the user out of the equation. For a person with the lived experience of being told they don't belong in programming and being afraid of failure in the programming world, a common experience for women in computing, unclear or unhelpful error messages are more likely to have negative. All of these things, therefore, lead to the necessary exclusion of people who already have a hard or difficult time finding their place inside of the programming community. The exclusion of women in computer science. So she goes on to represent the case that women are being excluded and that they are a minority. In 2015, only 20% of people receiving a PhD in the US were women, and female researchers are estimated to only have authored about 10% of computer science papers. Underrepresented problems are magnified when considering the intersection between race and gender. And so then she describes the average percentage of women computer science faculty members in the US is almost 17%, but the programming languages community is second lowest with 14%, second only to the theory, which is 13%. Only 10 female organizers out of 78 are found in programming language organizations, a percentage of 13%. The next section is a childhood of missed opportunities and experiences. So essentially what she describes here is the concept that boys are treated like boys and girls are treated like girls. Men and women grow up with a difference of, let's say, guidance, because there are predetermined views on which gender belongs in programming. That's her case. That's what she's saying here. So the idea is something along the lines of boys are more interested in things and girls are more interested in socializing people, more like empathetic or sympathetic things. So it's quantitative versus qualitative again. And I think she rightfully makes that case. I think that's true. And so girls are guided towards activities like sewing, embroidering, more girly types of things, whereas boys will do things like sports or programming, chess, things like that. As a result, the socialization of girls versus boys is very different. And so right from the get-go, girls can feel that they cannot enter the world of computers without endangering their sense of femininity. A study that she references finds that teachers encourage boys' technological play in different ways than they do girls. So right out the gate, we come out with boys and girls having been predisposed to, whatever she's describing here. Stereotype and the stereotype threat. And so she describes how there is a negative stereotype. For example, a lot of people think women are bad at math. And so therefore, when women enter the mathematical field, they're immediately treated or looked at as if they're going to fail. The stereotypes go further. There is a cultural and societal framing of what women are capable of doing. And so people's beliefs are discriminatory in STEM. For example, there is research showing that STEM fields where people believe that innate talent is essential for success are more likely to have gender imbalances than fields that believe hard work is important for success. So the concept here is something along the lines of women don't have an innate talent for STEM. Therefore, we're going to lean on people we do think have an innate talent for STEM. A lifetime of different opportunities and experiences. Programming self-efficacy, the belief that one can achieve success in programming is lower for girls and women than for boys and men. Recent work in Denmark has shown that gender-based preferences impact their choices in a computer science context. When university students were given the choice between equivalent coursework, female students favor assignments around people and male students prefer those around things. And high school-aged students show similar preferences. I'm going to leave it be. I'll just reiterate what she's saying here. When given the choice, girls lean towards the people and boys lean towards the things. It continues throughout their academic life. For example, the community around the LilyPad, an Arduino variant that can be used to add electronics to clothing, e-textiles, is 65% female. Critically, interest and behavior is malleable, even in light of factors like gender. It has been observed that gender-based differences in interest disappear in more demographically balanced and culturally inclusive settings. I'm going to just continue. Research method. So we analyze programming languages through a feminist lens. What is this lens? Well, what's lens, right? And so it's like photography. It's how you view the world and how you interpret information that you receive. And then she goes to talk about social sciences, how your community, your context, etc., can form a lens by which you see data. The goal of the essay, and so she does consider it an essay here very explicitly. What does it mean to design a programming language? And what is a programming language? Gendered science and knowledge. Natural science fields have historically been defined by and their credibility built upon manly attributes. In glaciology, these manly attributes are triumphs over hostile lands. In programming, these are triumphs over complex maths. The programming language culture is largely masculine, How so? Well, a study of over 2,000 papers authored between 1973 and 2012 in programming language conferences identified 65 empirical studies into aspects of language design. So what she's explaining here is that when programming language design is considered among the scientific field for designing programming languages, a very small portion of them consider the qualitative works of programming language design. Therefore, views are limited, and one cannot create a good programming language purely through quantitative, mathematical, formalized proofs about what a programming language should be. She goes on to describe other statistics and analysis whereby programming language design is heavily devoid of qualitative efforts to make it, holistic. That's what she says here. We are robbing ourselves of a place for conversations on the different perspectives and the ways people use with programming languages. How do we study programming languages? She goes on to talk about more papers. The soundness, clarity, and depth of a technical or theoretical contribution and the level of thoroughness and completeness of an evaluation. Such formulation leaves room for user studies which are also published in software engineering. However, what is accepted is overwhelmingly quantitative methods. So she says that there is an opening. You can absolutely create papers that tackle the qualitative metrics, or I guess just the qualitative outcomes of programming languages, but the acceptance rate of qualitative versus quantitative is not there. It's vastly underrepresented. So she continues to go over this, how people's anecdotes, user experiences, semantics, the use of a programming language, these things are underrepresented in the scientific field, and only the quantitative stuff is tackled. Feminism can help us to understand the narrow and numerical methodological practices, research methods and practices that do not fall within the masculine discourse of hard are seen as less valuable. These are frequently associated with women/femininity, such as research involving people and qualitative work more generally. That means that our community does not employ these research methods, even though they could shed a different light on how to improve the state of the art for all people that work with programming languages and systems. Okay? She goes on to describe how programming languages is framed as a mathematical concept. You need to have a proof. When you're creating a program or a programming language, it has to be based on some kind of proof style. She uses the mathematical proof as a comparison of that. I too believed for a long time that mathematics is the true origin of programming languages and computer science. Many computer science departments were part of mathematics departments before they became separate departments, although the history of computer science and math is long and complicated, and not true all computer science programs are part of math. MIT computer science originated as part of the electrical engineering department. Again, I'm just going to leave it there and continue. And Harvard's came from applied mathematics, part of engineering. However, programming did not start off as mathematics. It had to be made mathematical. Programming started as an activity closely related to electrical engineering when programs were created by connecting wires. Only later was it reinvented in academia as mathematics. For example, Dijkstra argued in the mid-70s, decades after programming languages were created, that it must be understood as mathematical. He also argued that soft sciences had no place in software engineering, that it required hard sciences. And so she continues to state that this kind of thinking necessarily excluded women who originally found themselves as some of the originators of programming. How so? It became formalized and turned into an academic process. And through this formalization in academic procedure, women were excluded. As an example, she states at Splash 23, a conference that she went to, I witnessed a senior academic jokingly say that a paper was rejected because it did not have enough Greek letters for POP-L. POP-L is a programming language design kind of a thing. Now, where does she get the concept that women were part of the origination of programming language design, or just programming languages in themselves? Well, she starts off as saying that in the early days, people admitted that women were better programmers. For example, the early days of computing were unusually open to females because of the lack of a fully established scientific or engineering discipline, and therefore it left space open for women. As programming became more automated, it was replaced by. Not long ago, programming was seen as women's work. People used to believe that women are good at programming because they are fastidious. They worry how all the details fit together while still keeping the big picture in mind, and programming requires patience and persistence, and these are traits that many girls have, and she cites a couple of references for this. In this regard, programming differs fundamentally from glaciology and other subfields in engineering and academia in that programming started female and became male, while other fields were male from the outset and remained as such. This paper she cites describes that software development puts women in the ambivalent position of being either female or a coder, but not both. And then she describes her own experience. Reading that work, I remembered my rejection of knitting, of earrings, and of dresses. I saw my own history through new eyes. This, too, is the power of feminism. It connects women through time and space and gives them a deeper understanding of themselves. In a field with so little women, it is hard to gain this understanding. I was never exposed to feminist or inclusion research before I deliberately went looking for it. And yet, reading about the experiences of all those other women in different times and places who were also struggling with belonging in a field that they love made me understand a part of me that I was never able to before. Systems of scientific domination. Structural, disciplinary, hegemonic, and interpersonal. What is structural domination in programming language design? It's structural because you have to follow a particular set of processes in order to get across an accepted level of programming language design that is fundamentally masculine. So she just basically refers back to the masculinity behind these systems and then says, therefore it is structural. You have to have the appropriate metrics. You have to meet these baselines, etc., etc. It's not qualitative. Disciplinary. It means that you cannot deviate from the kind of work that people put in. If you deviate from the quantitative work and you decide to do something qualitative, you're not taken as seriously. So again, she refers back to the, oh, that's a feminine way to do programming. Ew. That from her perspective, right? The hegemonic. She describes, again, referring back to the concept that the programming language computer science field is male dominated and therefore you have the male hegemony. Interpersonal. So this is one that I want to dig into just a little bit. She says, one way in which this happens, the interpersonal exclusion of other people's voices, is by disallowing non-traditional programming language researchers deep discussions, for example, at conferences. A person researching a traditional programming language topic, such as dependent types, is quite likely to be greeted at a conference with immediate deep questions about their work. Have you seen this paper? Do you know such and such? From their perspective, conferences are rife with opportunities to learn. In contrast, those who are working outside of regular topics, as I have personally experienced both when working on spreadsheets and on non-English programming languages, are only presented with entry-level questions. Why is that interesting? Why is that hard? The latter question tying into the notion that hard is valuable and valuable is hard. It's emotionally draining, and it robs researchers from learning. Colleagues mentioning to me that attending a conference is valuable because they always come back with new perspectives has largely felt foreign to me. I was in so many cases the person providing the new perspectives, not receiving them. A similar dynamic happens for those using non-traditional research methods. Basic questions about qualitative research rob qualitative researchers of the experience of learning. How so? If you are female or non-binary, or if you're a researcher with a disability, or if you are not white, you face another distracting dynamic. You are confronted with questions about yourself. And so this is bad. From her perspective, this is bad. If you're someone who is not representative of the, hegemony or what you would typically consider a programmer to look like, people showing interest in you because of your differences is bad, because it distracts from the qualitative work you're trying to present. It is not rare for me to have been asked in programming language spaces where the women are and what I personally thought of the reasons for the lack of women, or to be asked to give a lecture on gender or have breakfast with female students. While I enjoy these activities sometimes, and while this paper shows that these conversations are necessary and can be surely valuable, participating in such conversations always comes at the opportunity cost of discussing research work. Often uncompensated. Why shouldn't you get money for talking about how different you are, how unique you are in a field that's not unique, especially for women of color, their race and gender as part of their identity, whether they choose this or not. None of this is new. The first female police officer in the U.S. embarked on a national tour to promote female participation in policing in addition to her police work. Such diversity work is not just an unfortunate consequence of being the first, but it is often an ongoing process. As Morrison says, know the function. The very serious functions of racism is distraction. It keeps you from doing your work. It keeps you explaining over and over again your reason for being. None of that is necessary. There will always be one more thing. So the idea here is that sexism and racism will never end. And how do they never end? Well, because a sexist will look at your feminism or the fact that you're a female and constantly ask you questions about being female. And in a way, it's an implicit bias that a sexist person uses to perpetuate the concept or to perpetuate a discussion whereby the distraction of the real discussion just continues on. Same with racism. Asking you about the color of your skin instead of how it applies to programming language design is a distraction mechanism that racists use so that they don't get to the heart of the matter. How can anybody who is female or of a different skin color or has a disability or is non-binary, how can they ever have the opportunity to truly present their work, to truly present enhancements in a field, rigorous academic enhancements, if they are constantly being asked about their differences, of which they have no control over? And so this is just a playbook that these sexist, racist, bigoted, fascist people use. And again, I'm just trying to extract what she's saying here. The distraction is the mechanism by which they deny these people, they deny people of difference, their ability to actually meaningfully contribute. Knowledge production. Who is involved in gathering data and what data is being gathered? Well, if we look at the stories that are being collected about the history of women in the creation of programming languages, she cites in particular this one from 2009. She really digs into this one and just completely trash talks it because she says that it completely excluded, even though it didn't have to, even though its preface or its prologue or something like that, its opening, stated that women have a place in programming, it then completely excludes women's place in programming. The book is supposed to discuss the historical development, but instead what it does is it goes over 18 papers that discuss only the implementation of programming languages, one that discusses a more generic programming language idea, macros, and only one that discusses what a programming language is, the only one authored by women alone. The only one authored by a woman alone. Not the only one authored with women, just the only one authored by women alone. None of the papers explicitly aim to study the usage of a language. And so as a result, female authors, female contributions to programming languages are being explicitly excluded. How do we develop languages? A common practice is called dog fooding, which means that we use our own tools. So therefore, the unspoken assumption that the original creator of a programming language can take on the viewpoint of him or herself. It has the risk of becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. Surely people who think like the original creator will feel more at home in such a language or system. This, again, ties into the current community, which is homogenous in gender and also in race and abilities. What counts as a programming language? Spreadsheets. She makes the case for spreadsheets as a programming language. While having a number of characteristics of a programming language, like allowing users to perform calculations with variables and conditionals, spreadsheets are excluded from the dominant discourses in programming language design, as I've experienced extensively when I worked on them early in my career. This can be understood through the lens of masculinity. Many people can use spreadsheets. The Dutch Bureau of Statistics has reported a rise in people able to use formulas in spreadsheets from 44% in 2006 to 54% in 2013, as reported on the reference. This undercuts the belief that programming languages are hard to learn. Then she talks about UML, AWK, or SQL. HTML is not seen as a programming language, even in regular programming language discourse. Even Python is a scripting language, not a programming language. Excel not being Turing complete, she says, is an excuse. In a recent paper she received, it included the sentence, "I am uncomfortable with the definition of Excel as a programming language, despite many considering it such." Overlooking spreadsheets as a programming system has an impact in the real world. A recent paper that investigated how to best teach programming to people in the prison system describes a struggle to install the right software to do so. When at their conference presentation, they were asked why they did not consider Excel, which in addition to formulas includes a VBA interpreter, which was available, the audience burst out in laughter. Not seen as formal languages, they are excluded from study, even while having a history connected to programming, such as knitting, crocheting, weaving, sewing, and recipes. Jacquard looms were the original use case for punch cards, and early forms of computer memory were woven by hand. Women hand-threaded wire rope through and around magnetic ferrite cores for NASA's Apollo guidance system. Alternative representation. So the idea here is the diversification of programming languages aimed at more qualitative things, attracting people that value different things. One notable initiative was the Socio-PLT research program of Leo Mayerovich from Berkeley, who studied what factors lead to programming languages being adopted and found that these are often social and not technical factors. It won Best Paper in UPSLA 2013 and the most influential paper in 2023, so we can consider it successful. And therefore, people look at sociological factors, factors that are not based on the masculine proof of work, hardness stuff, in order to determine whether a programming language is worthy for them. However, it didn't make a dent in terms of programming language design and programming language creation. There were studies that claimed the productivity and quality improvements of using functional or object-oriented programming have not been tested in systematic ways, despite existing for 30 years. I will say that I find this to be true. I've had debates with other people who hang on to functional and object-oriented programming like it's the great utopia of programming that they think it is. But in terms of actual studies, whether there is an actual study that proves the productivity or the quality of the work, very few exist. And the ones that do exist, by the way, they do not speak highly of. So the argument behind this was that you need to consider people's qualitative viewpoint in order to get a study out of whether they find it to be more productive. So what she's calling for here is a self-reported productivity level when using these systems. User-centered design. More programming language design must account for user-centric usage. So the methodology, wording, verbiage, structure, error messages, etc., have to be based on all of the stuff she's talked about before. Programming language diversity. We need to have more languages, more programming languages, in ways that people can write better, depending on your context. So for example, there is an essay about programming languages that is built into non-traditional users, so wordplay. In hindsight, in this wordplay paper, it's a thing. We'll look it up in a second. In hindsight, I wondered how such a small privileged group of Western, mostly white people managed to shape so much of computing, and through computing, so much of our modern world. The result of Coe's exploration is a programming language in which we can manipulate emoji and letters, where a program is called a performance, catering to people with an interest in writing and text. And there is wordplay, the programming language. And so the case being made in the paper is that there have been attempts to help people of different backgrounds and contexts by providing them different ways of programming through programming languages such as this one, and that they have been relatively successful. And so therefore, why could it not continue to be successful? Why can't we do more of this? Let me just go down and see if there are any more pictures. I don't think this one has any more pictures. Yeah. Let me have a look at images. Yeah, there really isn't any more pictures beyond that one. In any case, let's continue. We're almost done. Non-English programming languages, we've been through that. Arabic, someone created an Arabic version of Lisp. Another example is Wen Yan in classical Chinese. And more generically, arguments have been made for non-English programming languages. She created one called Hetty. It does exist. And she has also received some disinterest. Not necessarily backlash, but disinterest. Exploring programming in feminine coded formalisms. Activities associated strongly with women are typically not covered in the programming language's context unless used as a way to make programming languages more relatable for the layperson, for example, in wherein a recipe is used to demonstrate a formal language like a computer language. So essentially what she's saying is that you can use things like weaving as a term inside of programming language design. She literally says that right here, weaving. Weave could mean to decide whether a warp thread is to be picked up or not. Feminine coded formalisms could include crocheting patterns, knitting patterns, etc. Think about this. We already have machines that knit for us. So why not include more feminist, inclusive terminology in programming language design, whereby you can use this terminology to mean all kinds of things that are appropriate. However, what's happening, she states, is that the masculine research in the natural sciences has a strong tendency to classify, measure, map, and ideally dominate and control. What came before, what comes next? We are by no means the first people to discuss the history of women in programming languages or to report on the effect of the mathematicalization of our field on gender diversity, or even the impact that feminism could have on computer science and programming languages. However, I was surprised to read how little there is on the understanding of feminism within programming language design and computer science in general. Seeing the amount of researchers who have explored feminism and programming in so many ways, including dozens of women I had never heard of, was as much comforting as it was painful. How is it that I can exist in computer science for over 2 decades and never hear about any of this work in my education, in conferences, in books, and talks?